Welcome back. This is Dr. Rusty Jones covering Act 4 of Henry V. And being quarantined has allowed me to do a lot of self-growth, a lot of interesting things. So I've decided to stay up with all of the newest, latest kid-oriented trends. And so I thought I'd start off this video by doing the TikTok dance by famous artist Charlie D'Amelio, her new distance dance. So hang on a second. No, I'm going to start the distance. I'm going to do it right now.
Sit down.
What?
Sit down. No dancing. No.
One Charlie D'Amelio dance?
No.
They won't let me have any fun. Anyway, on to Act 4 of Henry V. So where we stopped last time, Henry had disguised himself. He's going to go amongst his troops so he can gauge how ready they are for the battle or how insecure and frightened they are before what is looking to be a lost cause against the French at Agincourt. What he says specifically is that he is going to debate with his bosom while he himself is having doubts about how this is going to go. He's very, very nervous and scared. So he disguises himself, and I'm starting in Act 4, Scene 1, page 72 in your text, so make sure you have that open, and so you can follow along. And we're starting with about line 87 or so, the discussion between the king in disguise, Court, Bates, and Williams. And there are a few really interesting things that I want to bring up here with regard to the insecurities and the fears that Henry has inside of himself. And the reason that I wanted to start with this is that it's a rather unique thing that Shakespeare is doing. He's presenting a king that we have seen over the course of, this is the third play with Hal in Henry IV, Part 1, Part 2, and now King Henry in Henry V. And here, what I think is interesting is the fact that we are still getting a glimpse of the human, a little glimpse of the human Hal behind the ideology of English monarchy as embodied by Henry V. We get some of his humanity. And this is a kind of a dangerous thing for Shakespeare to do because a king is divinely ordained by God, God's representative on earth, divine right of kings, divine authority, all of that. To kind of pull the curtain back, like in Wizard of Oz, and show the man behind it, although we have seen the man behind it in a number of plays, is a rather dangerous thing to do. So we get to see some of Henry's humanity, which is both troubling from a political standpoint, but also very, very enlightening and ennobling from a human standpoint. So Henry in disguise comes upon his three soldiers, John Bates, Alexander Court, and Michael Williams. Court says, "Brother John Bates, is not that the morning which breaks yonder?" Bates says, "I think it be. But we have no great cause to desire the approach of day." Williams says, "We see yonder the beginning of the day, but I think we shall never see the end of it. Who goes there?" And of course it's Henry in disguise, "A friend. Under what captain serve you?" And Henry says, "Under Sir Thomas Erpingham." "A good old commander and a most kind gentleman. I pray you, what thinks he of our estate? What does he think about how the battle is going to go?" And Henry responds interestingly, "Even as men racked upon a sand that look to be washed off at the next tide." He's baiting them to some degree. What does Erpingham think? Well, he hasn't really asked that. He just throws something out there. He thinks we're going to lose. He thinks it's going to go really badly, like a ship that's wrecked on the sand that's going to be washed away on the next tide. Bates says he hath not told his thought to the king. And Henry says, "No, nor is it not meet he should." No, he hasn't, and he absolutely should not do that. "For though I speak it to you, I think the king is but a man, as I am." Now, the irony there is, of course, that this is Henry. But again, drawing the curtain back and saying, all of that ideology of ceremony and divine representation and all of that. He is a man as I am. "The violet smells to him as it doth to me. The element shows to him as it doth to me. All his senses have but human conditions." Well, it's supposed to be more than human conditions. Do you remember the lines from Romeo and Juliet where Juliet says, "Well, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." Strip away the titles, get down to the essential humanity, and what have you got? Basically a man. She wants all of, Juliet, I should say, wants all of that ceremony, all the titles, everything that comes with it, all the political nature stripped away, so she can just have this man. She can just have Romeo. And Henry's playing with the same idea here, that under the ceremony of kingship is essentially just a human, and it's important, he says, for his soldiers to remember this. Although he is still king, he does remind them of that. Bates says he may show what outward courage he will, But I, referring to the king, of course, but I believe, as cold a night as it is, he could wish him in the Thames up to his neck. And so I would he were, and I by him at all adventures. So we were quit here. Um, Basically, he's revealed the fact that he'd much rather be home. No big surprise there. A sign of cowardice? I'm not quite sure. By my troth, I will speak my conscience of the king, says Henry of himself. I think he would not wish himself anywhere but where he is. Speaking on behalf of the king is. Then I would he were here alone, says Bates. So should he be sure to be ransomed, and many poor men's lives saved. Well, Bates has a point here. If a king goes into battle, the point isn't to destroy the king. The point is to kidnap the king, to grab him during battle. And that way you can ransom him for a king's fortune to get him back. The king will be fine, says Bates. It's the rest of us that are going to be dead. Methinks, says Henry, I could not die anywhere so contented as in the king's company, his cause being just and his quarrel honorable. Remember him worrying about whether or not something is just and right. Now he's sounding out his men saying, basically, I know I'm right being here because the king's cause is just and honorable. He wants to make sure that they know that as well. And Williams replies with the very sort of ambiguous, well, that's more than we know. We don't know. We don't know what the cause is. We're foot soldiers. Who's going to tell us? Aye, or more than we should seek after, says Bates, who now seems to be on the king's side. For we know enough if we know we are the king's subjects. If his cause be wrong, our obedience to the king wipes the crime of it out of us. And what he means by that is, doesn't really matter. As long as we are good subjects and obedient to divine authority, even if the king is wrong, we're not going to be blamed for it. But Williams is having none of that. But if the cause be not good, says Williams, the king himself hath a heavy reckoning to make when all those legs and arms and heads chopped off in a battle shall join together at the latter day, at judgment day, and cry all, we died at such a place, some swearing, some crying for a surgeon, some upon their wives left poor behind them, some upon the debts they owe, some upon their children rawly left. I'm afeard that there are few die well that die in a battle. For how can they charitably dispose of anything when blood is their argument? Now if these men do not die well, it'll be a black matter for the king that led them to it, who to disobey were against all proportion of subjection. So he says basically, if these men die in a bad cause, when judgment day comes, they will come back and accuse the king for leading them in a bad cause. Henry has an answer to this. So if a son that is by his father sent about merchandise, do sinfully miscarry upon the sea, the imputation of his wickedness by your rule should be imposed upon his father that sent him? In other words, look, if a father sends you off to do something and then you do really terrible things while you're out doing it, it's the father's fault who sent him? Now, rabbit and duck again. You could argue that Henry's trying to avoid having any kind of responsibility, or maybe you're right. Maybe it's the ducky part. Maybe he's got a point. As he says a little bit farther down in this speech, I'm going to find this. Line 169. Then if they, the foot soldiers, die unprovided, no more is the king guilty of their damnation than he was before guilty of those impieties for the which they are now visited. You can't blame the king if these people die badly and they're damned. It's their own fault for what they've done, not the king that sent them to it. Every subject's duty is the king's, he says. Everybody, all subjects owe their obedience to the king. But every subject's soul is his own. So the king can basically command their bodies. He cannot command their souls. Now you could argue that Henry wants it, have his cake and eat it too. He wants it both ways. He doesn't want to be responsible for their souls. He only wants to be responsible for sending them there. And on the surface, that sounds correct. You're responsible for your behavior. You have free will. The king can only send you somewhere. He can't tell you how to behave. And that to some degree makes sense. And yet Henry continues to worry that in fact, once these folks have left his company, that yes, he is responsible for their soul. And in leading them into this lost cause, he may in fact be damning their souls as well as condemning their bodies to have their heads and arms and legs chopped off and all the rest of it. In the next page 75, about line 190 or so, the king in disguise, again, gets into a quarrel with the foot soldier Williams. which again is this glimpse of Hal. I mean, why would he do this? Why would he spark this kind of animosity between a king in disguise and a common foot soldier when he knows all he has to do, and exactly what he does near the end of the play is when he meets Williams again after the victory, reveals himself and says, "Hey, by the way, I was the one that you argued with and said that we were going to have a fight about this. You want to fight now?" And Williams, what's he going to say? Of course, "Oh no, Your Majesty, no, you're good. I'm sorry. Sorry about that." Again, it's the same kind of silly, childish trick that Hal would have done in Henry IV Part 1 or Henry IV Part 2. Again, how much of a king is he really? Well, after this, the king gets to worry again about what I mentioned before about damning his soldiers. This is line 223. I want to spend a second with this before I get to one of the more famous speeches in the play. "Upon the king," says Henry when he's finally by himself, "let us our lives, our souls, our debts, our careful wives, our children, and our sins lay on the king. We must bear all." That's the royal we. We must bear all. Now you can say, "Oh, boo-hoo, you're the king. Get over it." But you might also say, "I've never really thought about that. Think about being like president of the United States or prime minister of England. Everything is your fault. Everybody blames you for everything, no matter what it is. It must be a terrible burden to bear." And again, you can say, "Oh, well, boo-hoo, you get to live in a giant mansion and have everybody call you Your Majesty or, Mr. President or whatever it is." But it's still a terrible burden to bear. And Shakespeare's kind of pulling the curtain back on the humanity or the human cost of kingship. Let's see. "O hard condition, twin born with greatness! Must kings, what infinite heart's ease must kings neglect that private men enjoy?" Now, again, boo-hoo, but then again, he's right. They can't do what all the common men can do. "And what have kings that privates have not too, save," meaning except, "ceremony?" What have we got except ceremony? People have to bow to us. They have to exit the room without turning their back on us. They have to call us certain things. "Save general ceremony. And what art thou, thou idle ceremony? What kind of god art thou, that sufferest more of mortal griefs than do thy worshippers? O ceremony, show me but thy worth. What is thy soul of adoration?" Jumping forward a little bit. "I am a king," and I'm at line 253 or so. "I am a king that find thee, ceremony, and I know it is not, or 'tis not the balm, the scepter and the ball, the sword, the mace, the crown imperial, the intertissued robe of gold and pearl, the farced title running before the king, the throne he sits on, nor the tide of pomp that beats upon the high shore of the world." He's mentioning all the ceremonies that the king gets to or has to endure. "No, not all these, thrice gorgeous ceremony, not all these, laid in bed majestical, can sleep so soundly as the wretched slave, who, with a body filled and vacant mind, gets him to rest, crammed with distressful bread. Never sees horrid night, the child of hell, but like a lackey, from the rise to set, sweats in the eye of Phoebus, and all night sleeps in Elysium. Next day after dawn, doth rise and help Hyperion to his horse, and follows so the ever-running year with profitable labor to his grave. And but for ceremony, such a wretch, winding up days with toil and nights with sleep, had the forehand and vantage of a king." And again, argue on this any side that you students feel fit, or feel is best to argue. Again, boo-hoo. You have to put up with a lot more than the average man, your king. But it's also a point. Maybe the common person who gets to go home and work, go off to work, fill themselves with distressful bread, as you say, and come home and actually sleep and not have to worry about the cares of a nation might have the advantage of a king. Maybe we have the advantage over a president or a prime minister or whatever it is, particularly in these times. So judge Henry on that one. The last thing I want to mention before I get to the more famous speech, and then I'll have to cut this off and we'll deal with Act 5 on Monday during that lecture, is at line 282, the prayer that Henry makes after Erpingham interrupts him. "O God of battles, steel my soldiers' hearts. Please, please, please let them fight well. Possess them not with fear. Take from them now the sense of reckoning, if the opposed numbers pluck their hearts from them. Not today, O Lord, oh, not today. Think not upon the fault my father made, encompassing the crown." Ah, that's a reference way back to the first play in this tetralogy, Richard II, where Henry V's father, Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, took the crown from Richard. Now, you could argue there that Henry V's father was a usurper, or maybe again, he was putting down the tyrannical Richard II. It's very ambiguous in Shakespeare's play. Um, the point is that Henry V does not want him and his soldiers punished for the crimes of the father, which is exactly part of the argument he was having back before, that the father, or the son should not the father should not be held responsible if the son does something bad while they're away. Well, here he's worrying about the fact that he will be held responsible for the sins of his father. So Henry's kind of going back on what he himself was arguing before. I, Richard's body, that's Richard II from the first play, I, Richard's body, have interred new, I've reburied him, and on it have bestowed more contrite tears than from it issued forced drops of blood. He's admitting that the drops of blood that came from Richard were forced, that he was murdered, possibly on the orders of his own father, Henry IV. There's a lot of potential blame there that could come from God on his soldiers, and Henry recognizes that. 500 poor I have in yearly pay, who twice a day their withered hands hold up toward heaven to pardon blood. And I have built 2 chantries, where the sad and solemn priests sing still for Richard's soul, Richard II. More will I do, though all that I can do is nothing worth, since that my penitence comes after all, imploring pardon. So again, is he just fearful that he's going to be punished for his father's sins? Is he in fact truly penitent? Rabbit or duck, you tell me. Now, leaping forward, this is where I'm going to end it today. I want to end with one of the more famous speeches. This is right before the Battle of Agincourt itself, and it starts on page 82, Act 4, Scene 3, starting right at the top of the scene. I do want you to watch this on your own. I will post a link to it on Canvas after I post this YouTube video there. But I kind of want you to hear the audio of it, so I hope that this works. And if it doesn't, forgive me. Or if YouTube flags it. This is from a YouTube video, so I assume it's fair game. It's been up for a while. This is the St. Crispin's Day speech, and I'm going to try to interrupt it as I can. Hopefully you can hear it just fine. If not, check out the speech at line 20 and going over all the way to line, about line 68. So let's see if this works. Here we go.
Where is the king?
The king himself is rode to view their battle.
Of fighting men, they have full 300,000.
That's 5 to 1. Besides, they are all fresh.
'Tis a fearful odds. Oh, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those men in England that do no work today.
What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor.
It's an interesting appeal that he makes there. If we're marked to die, fine. But don't wish for any more men, because the fewer of us are, the more honor there is to go around when we win. He's already projecting a win on these people. It's an amazing kind of uplifter that he's doing here, and he's appealing to the sense of there will be honor enough. If we're going to die, big deal. But if we win, think about how glorious it's going to be.
God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. Rather, proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us.
Again, Henry may actually mean that, or it may just be a spectacularly intelligent thing to do. In other words, who is going to leave? Now that someone said, hey, you don't want to die with us? You're not into honor? You're a coward? You want to run away? We'll give you money. We'll send you on your merry way. Who's going to leave when you say that? Nobody. Very intelligent, rousing speech to get his men to fight against such fearful odds against the French, as was said earlier.
This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand at tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live old age will yearly, on the vigil, feast his neighbours and say, tomorrow is St. Crispin's. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day.
What's remarkable about this is, in the minds of his soldiers, he's already projecting the kind of amazing victory that, if it occurs, will give them the kind of honor that allows them to step forward in the future, show their scars, and say, I had these on St. Crispin's Day. It's almost like he's projecting an epic victory in the aftermath that people can imagine, the kind of glory that's going to come with it when they get home and have a long future full of the ability to show what an amazing thing they've done when they haven't done it yet. Amazing.
Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in their mouths as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered.
Now he's telling them that this is going to become basically an epic tale that will pass from generation to generation. And he names the nobles, but he's about to include the yeomen in this as well. You'll all be part of this fantastic epic. This whole idea of dying and being overwhelmed and all the rest of this seems to be gone, and now this brilliant epic future is being projected for his men. It's so smart.
We few, we happy few, we band of brothers.
Happy here can also mean lucky. We fortunate few. There's just a few of us, and more honor for us. Band of brothers, of course, has been used for a very long time since this to suggest again that there are no class distinctions amongst the armies. We are all here. We are all in this together. And whether or not Henry believes it, it's a beautiful phrase. Band of brothers.
For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition.
That again is Henry erasing class distinctions. I think, or at least I hope, he means it in this instance, but you never know.
And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap.
Now he's saying the people who aren't here are going to feel like their manhoods have been degraded, as opposed to you guys. So there's that appeal to manhood again that he did earlier at Harfleur.
While Denny speaks, the thought with us upon St. Crispin's Day!
There we go. I've got a few minutes left before I reach the 30-minute mark. So there's another point that I want to make. I want you to jump forward, please, to Act 4, Scene 6, page 92. Right at the end of this scene, the king is still fighting the war. The French have begun another advance from the front. They have French prisoners in the rear. And Henry says, I blame you not. For hearing this, I must perforce compound with my full eyes, or they will issue too, because they've been talking about the death of certain noblemen. Then there's an alarm. Uh-oh, something's wrong. But hark, what new alarm is this same? The French have reinforced their scattered men. Then every soldier kill his prisoners. Give the word through. Now, from a strategic standpoint, this makes perfect sense. If you've got an army attacking from the front and you are in the middle, the last thing that you want is to have your prisoners that are behind the lines raise up and come at you, because then you've got folks coming at you from two sides. But kill the prisoners? That is expressly against the conduct of war. Even in the Middle Ages, and certainly beyond that, killing the prisoners is considered, in essence, in our terms anyway, a war crime. And Henry, it's a great strategic move, but it is an immoral move. It is against the rules of war. Well, in the very next scene, Llewellyn, the Welsh captain, and Gower come in. And the very first thing we hear out of Llewellyn's mouth is, kill the boys and the luggage. 'Tis expressly against the law of arms. 'Tis as errant a piece of knavery, mark you now, as can be offered. In your conscience now. Is it not? And Gower says, 'tis certain. There's not a boy left alive, and the cowardly rascals that ran from the battle have done this slaughter. Besides, they have burned and carried away all that was in the king's tent. Wherefore the king most worthily hath caused every soldier to cut his prisoner's throat. Oh, 'tis a gallant king. Yeah, okay. So what has happened here is that we now learn from Fluellen that the French have snuck behind the lines of the English and they have killed all the boys who've been guarding all of the stores of the English army. And that, as Fluellen says, is expressly against the law of arms, the laws of war. So they go on to say in that little bit I just read to you, isn't it wonderful that the king has ordered all the French prisoners to have their throats cut because they did such a terrible thing to all of our unarmed boys, and they've stolen all of our luggage, and all of these things against the rules of war, except for one little problem. Henry ordered the French prisoners to have their throats cut before he knew that the French had stuck behind the lines and killed all the boys. So that just seems like dumb luck to me anyway, that he did something that turned out to be fine and noble, but that's not why he did it originally. He did it for strategic advantage, and it is expressly against the laws of warfare. So again, same issue. Evil, evil ducky, good bunny. Which one is it? Henry, to me, to my mind, this is a moment where you might accuse him of being a war criminal, but as it turns out, he's an extraordinarily lucky war criminal. So how do you want to judge him on this basis? I've got a couple of minutes left here, so let me jump forward. Page 95, Act 4, Scene 7, line 85, the French proclaim that the day belongs to Henry. The English have won against fearful odds. The argument with Williams is, as I already mentioned, solved on page 100, Act 4, Scene 8. And the king says at line 78 that there are 10,000 French dead in the field, princes, nobles, knights, etc. 10,000. And if you flip forward to the number of English dead at line 100, where's the number of our English dead? Edward the Duke of York, the Earl of Suffolk, Sir Richard Ketley, Davy Gam, Esquire, none else of name, and all other men but 5 and 20. Was it that lopsided of a victory? No. But was it a lopsided victory? Yes, for the reasons that I've already explained to you. And I do think it's interesting that he lists off the names of the nobles and even an esquire, even a knight in training, but he just says, oh, and then there are a bunch of other people who are really of no name. So all that thing about social distinctions being erased in battle seems to have gone out the window when he doesn't feel that the common foot soldiers are worth naming, but, you know, I leave it at that. All right, I'm going to deal with Act 5 on Monday. Don't forget, I'm going to post some discussion board prompts Friday morning. Check this video out on Friday as well. And please stay safe and contact me if you need me. And everybody else watching this YouTube video, I hope you enjoyed it. Wait for Act 5 and Catherine and Henry and their wooing scene. Oh boy, that's a beaut.